Hey guys, this is Blake from Blake's Sanctum, retro site for retro games. Subscribe.
Welcome to a special bonus episode in my website and video series covering classic civilization genre games like Colonization, Master of Magic, Test of Time, Alpha Centauri, Call to Power, and of course the Civ series itself. In these bonus videos, I'll be touring some of the awesome fan games and my favourite scenarios and mods for all these games, as well as my own personal mods, while also trying to sneakily play as the barbarians via hacks or cheats. In my main series, I show you how to play these great old games in HD using either special versions, tricks or mods. Check out the playlist link up top or in the video description and comments below to see the other episodes.
Hey guys, today I'm bringing you another special bonus episode in my series on how to play classic civilization genre games in HD, and also look at some of their best mods and fan remakes. And this is my C-evo episode, which I think originally stood for Civilization Evolved or Evolution or one or the other. And much like the very well known and popular Free Civ fan game, C-evo is a fan game heavily inspired by Sid Meier's Civilization 2, and it feels very similar, but changes the game in many interesting ways. So I'm going to talk more about what this fan game is, then I'm going to load some save games and show you different cool parts of the game, and then lastly I'll show you some interesting mods for it. So if you want to skip ahead, I'll be posting time skip links in the video description below. And make sure you check out the playlist link below there too to check out all the other great Civ-like games, mods and fan remake tour videos too. Now C-evo doesn't have any music, so I'm just going to pipe in some good old classic Civ 2 music. There's also not a huge amount of sounds, and there's no videos, as multimedia enhancement was never really the original aim of the C-evo project, as its real aim was to recreate that classic mid-90s Civ 2-like strategy gameplay experience, but with more emphasis on the simulation side of things, with an Alpha Centauri like custom military unit designer that's super cool, an extremely powerful deadly AI that doesn't cheat, and a careful redesign of the Civ 2 rules, resulting in a true challenge. The game actually uses very similar asset files to Civ 2, allowing for lots of cool, relatively easy to make mods as well. So sure enough, fans have made some for Star Wars, Mars, Lord of the Rings, and all sorts of stuff that I'll show you later. Now what you're looking at here is the final C-evo release from 2013. That's essentially a finished game and is fully playable. However, in the decades since, fans have taken on the mantle of continuing the project and improving the game even further. First, Chronos started the C-evo New Horizons project and ported the game from Delphi to Lazarus, making many improvements, including localization for multiple new languages. And then, in more recent times, a fellow named Peter Blackman forked Chronos' version to the C-evo Distant Horizon project, improving the game even further. And Peter has actually recently released a brand new version for Windows and Linux that adds a much larger map sizes and even more languages. So let's start a new game with this latest version. Now the game of course comes with a standard random map generator, and you can also change the difficulty and you can increase the nations, and thankfully the game supports twice as many as Civ 2 in that you can go all the way up to 15 total players, but 14 AI adversaries, which obviously doesn't compare to Free Civ, which can go into the hundreds, but it's still pretty good when compared to Civ 2. This latest version, which doesn't seem to use a background image, so I've just slapped their website up behind us instead. But of course, for players like me that really love playing Earth games, you will not be disappointed. The game does come with a whole bunch of lovely maps, including an Earth map, which if I load it up in the C-evo map editor that comes with the game, which you can of course use to make lots of maps for the game yourself too, or change any of the existing ones like this one, we can see that the map is pretty similar in size to the Civ 2 Earth map, but just sort of everything's at a bit of a different angle, which looks a bit weird. However, for Earth-loving players, there's actually a better option, which I'll show you guys instead. Now, something to be careful of when you close the map is that if you save it, it will override the original. So be careful. If we go down a little bit further, past all these other rather interesting sounding maps, we've got My Earth, which is a whopping 258% of normal size, which if I load it up in the editor, you can see it is pretty friggin' massive and definitely way bigger than the regular Civ 2 map. I look at North America, you can fit a lot of cities in that. And South America's pretty impressive too, and Africa and Europe is bigger, and Russia is just utterly massive, of course. Asian continents and islands and Australia are pretty big too, although Australia looks a bit weirdly shaped. Now, just like in Civ 2, you can set the starting positions. However, unfortunately, I have not been able to find an option to set which Civ starts where, so they all seem to end up getting randomly jumbled between them. The only thing I can guarantee is my own start using the preferred starting position option, which is a bit of a shame really, because that severely limits the ability to create scenarios for this game. Although some people have created a few things, but it's just you don't have the level of control you need to do the kind of things we can do with Civ 2. So hopefully they might change that in the future. So how about we start a new game on this lovely big Earth map, and we'll go as the Americans. Looks like there's one for each slot, which actually means there's less to choose from than Civ 2, sadly. But I'm sure they could be renamed in the game's files. So here we go. We built a permanent settlement in order to do farming, which is a much more efficient way to feed than hunting and gathering. Excess food has an effect largely unknown on our nomadic ancestors. Growth. We've got a nice wooden themed GUI that will change each time we achieve different eras in technology, kind of like in Age of Empires. As you can see, there are all sorts of interesting cheat options and customizations in these menus. You can get all the advances, speed up the game, reveal the map, meet everyone. You can create city build queues and settler and land improvement routines. And then here you've got the usual movement speed options, city screen options, scrolling and tile stuff I'll show you in a sec, and even some interesting test options for the simulations where you can watch all the AIs going at it. But we just want to reveal the map, so let's do that. And here we go. And as you can see, everything's looking very Civ 2-like, isn't it? And I actually recognize some of these graphics from Civ 2 mods out there, like Tim Smith's high-res graphics pack for those jungles, and the pine trees are from another mod, but I can't remember it. The rivers look familiar, and the mountains too. But most of it is basically either new or heavily modified Civ 2 terrains to, avoid the copyright issues and make them nice and original and unique. I like how the map maker has connected England to the mainland in this one to stop that annoying problem in Civ 1 and Civ 2 where they just sit there all game. And of course all the AIs are randomized, like I warn you guys, they're all in the wrong places, so that's why you've got Russians in South America and Japanese Vikings, English in India, and Babylonians in China, and Mongols in Japan, and down here we got, Romans in Australia, and Egyptians in New Zealand. Man, just look at all those islands. Just imagine all those one square ocean cities you could put on them. But yeah, the map looks pretty good, doesn't it? And I like the graphics. Now, kind of like Civ 3, at the start of the game, you can only see some special resources, so you need to discover certain technologies to unlock the other special resources. So I'll show you them later in a save game. Now, if we move our settler out and fly through a few turns, I can show you that very similar to Civ 2, you can irrigate and build roads and all that. But interestingly, you don't need to be next to water to irrigate, which is kind of handy. And the units use a different movement system in that you'll see he's got 1.5 movement points, and that allows him to make one move up, down, left and right, but moving diagonally only takes one. So if this guy had 3 points of movement, he would have been able to do 2 moves up and down, but 3 moves diagonally, as the designer felt that was a more fair system. So I'll tell him to irrigate, and we can see everyone else's settlers doing their thing as well. And if I click on him, it has a nice turn counter that'll tell me how much progress he's made too, which is handy. But why don't I show you something else really cool? This game has different tile sizes, and it looks like a zoom function because everything seems bigger here. But what it's actually doing is loading different sized tile sets, as the game actually supports larger graphics with options for roughly 2 times and 3 times. And unfortunately there isn't, other than the deserts, all the other assets are not redrawn and appear to be just stretched, which gives the illusion of the zooming. But if you look at the actual source files, you can see that there are bigger cells ready to go with high resolution graphics for someone willing to make them, which I think is super cool and hopefully good inspiration to anyone working on a Civ 2 rebuilding project, as I think a lot of people would love to see Civ 2 with, 2 times or more sized assets in the engine. Kind of like what Petrograph and EA did with the Command & Conquer and Red Alert 4K remasters. And these fans here have shown that it's quite doable in a Civ 2 remake too. Although sadly they didn't go whole hog and give us double-sized or triple-sized cities and units though, sadly. So that's a bit of a shame, but hey, maybe one day they'll add that too. So before I load a save game, I should warn you guys that similar to the map editor, this game does not support multi-save states. It will just keep overriding your existing game. So if you want to have multiple save states, you're going to need to locate where the game saves the files, which for me was in my users, app data, local folder, and in there I found my save game and made copies of it. I guess they did this to stop reload spamming, but I don't know, it's just a bit annoying really. So now I can show you the save game loading area, where as you can see I've got a bunch of save states from different parts, where you can see that using my trickery I've been able to create multiple save states from different stages in my game. And why don't I load where I transition out of the ancient and medieval era into more of a Renaissance era. And as you can see, I've been expanding throughout Central America. And before anyone says the city names are all wrong, I know, but unfortunately the game doesn't appear to have options to set city names or rename existing ones, which is a bit of a shame. As you can see, I've got a few nice sailing ships exploring the oceans, and I've got a fortress and some musketeers keeping out the AIs in South America. I'll turn on cheat mode again, but before we go run around the map, why don't I show you guys what the city screen looks like. So here's my capital. We can see everything is pretty similar to Civ 2, but it's just rearranged. And there's this wonderful button here that allows you to toggle through different land usage priorities. So you can focus on growth, production, and trade and research, or hybrid options between each one of those. And of course, if you want, you can still manually select which pieces of land the city uses yourself, just like in Civ 2. But pretty quickly I found myself using the automatic options to save time. Now this nice little area down here shows different city districts and your buildings sitting in those districts. And you can see what they do, you can sell them, and of course we've got all the wonders down here. We've got the good old Colossus and a few other familiar and cool ones I'm sure you guys remember. And if you hit this button, you can also see what units the city is supporting too, and click on them and it'll take you to their location on the map. And units defending the city are displayed down in the bottom bar, which is slightly jarring if you're used to Civ 2, but nevertheless you do eventually get used to them being down there. Now if I click on our build options, you can see I've got a selection of buildings waiting to be built, and they're separated into different categories with buildings, units, and then wonders. And handily I can click on them and view them in this game's version of the Civilopedia. And you'll quickly notice that the wonders have changed. Many of them have different abilities to what you expect and know from Civ 2. And some are changed for the better and some are changed for the worse. Like, Leonardo's workshop doesn't really do anything useful now. Unless of course you've fallen behind in the tech race. So anyway, let's go have a look around, shall we? In my game we've got the Chinese in South America have been slowly expanding away around there, and then over in Africa and Europe it is chaos. Everyone's going at it, but you can start to see that the Egyptians are starting to get in a position of dominance. They have already steamrolled a bunch of other civs. But maybe the rest of Europe and the African continent civs just might be able to hold them off. We shall see. That's pretty much the only civs to survive them in the Far East are the ones on islands separated by water. You can see the Mongols are having a good time in Australia, and the Vikings aren't really doing much in New Zealand. So I'll turn cheat mode off now so we can end the turn, but maybe just before I do that, why don't I show you a couple more cool things, like the game's inbuilt tech tree screen, where you can see all the techs and what they gift you. It's kind of like the posters you used to get with Civ 2. And a lot of things will look familiar here. However, but those with a keen eye will notice that each era is separated, and there's sort of a master tech that will unlock a new era. And so the tech tree is actually heavily rebalanced. In some ways maybe better, but in some ways kind of worse, in that, as in my game, I had like SAM sites and I hadn't even discovered flight yet. And there's also some interesting and different future technology options that I'll show you guys later. Now, as you saw a bit of earlier, this game has its own built-in Civilopedia-like system, which they've just called the manual. You can look up heaps of the game's features, and of course, look at the descriptions and stats for everything. And of course, we've got all the terrain, which is very similar to Civ 2, with some minor differences in that shielded grassland is now just plains, and the old plains are now prairie. And of course, you've got all the usual Civ 2-like improvements, except they've added a new canal making ability, which is very handy, as of course you can make your own Panama Canal, which was only possible in Civ 2 if you put a city in a 1 square wide landmass, but here you can have massive water bridges across continents for boats to travel, which is pretty cool. Also got the lovely farmland and the fortress, which you can see I'm using down there, and there's an interesting military base option, which is pretty much the equivalent of Civ 2's airfield, but with some extra options. Now, Unit Features is an awesome redesigned version of the Civ 2 special ability system, and these can all be fed into a custom unit designer that functions quite similar to the Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri one, and I'll show you guys very soon. And then another interesting feature is that they've split up the buildings into a kind of Civ 3-like system where you've got all your regular buildings, which I'm sure you guys will recognize plenty of them here, as they're pretty much in Civ 2. Not a huge amount of differences, but a few every now and then, including a town hall that you later upgrade to a courthouse that without it you can't get any trade from the city, which is interesting. And then you've got state improvements, which are kind of like the mini wonders in Civ 3, where you can only build one per empire, but they have benefits across the empire. And most of them are actually sort of regular buildings from Civ 2, but have just been repurposed. And so as you can see, the stock exchange has a similar effect, except it's empire-wide in making all your banks more effective. And of course, then we've got all the wonders, which, like I said earlier, is pretty much all the ones from Civ 2, but many of them have been changed and repurposed. One of the more fascinating ones is the Eiffel Tower, which I always found rather useless in Civ 2, but here it stops all wonders from expiring, which is immensely good. I mean, just imagine having the Colossus and other wonders for the entire game, and the Lighthouse wonders being repurposed to be more like an offshore platform, so all your coastal cities will be far more powerful if you stop that from expiring with the Eiffel Tower. And then the governments down here are pretty similar to Civ 2 again. There's not a huge amount of differences in how they behave, so I did my usual strategy of monarchy and communism, and while I might eventually go to fundamentalism in the late game, in this one future technologies are more useful, so you might prefer a future society that actually makes you research them even quicker, as there are many future technologies to obtain that give you cool bonuses I'll show you soon. And as usual, you've got to go to Anarchy to switch between all these governments. Now let's finally end that turn and take ourselves into the next era, which I said Renaissance, but they've called it the Science era. Our ancestors' knowledge is incomplete and flawed. Many questions can't be answered correctly from the library. We parted with dogmatism, and we will evolve our view of the world by observing things. We call it science. And then I can pick my next technology, which works the same way as Civ 2, and I can look each one up in the pedia. But there is a different option at the bottom there I'll be showing you guys very soon, when I've got better technologies to really show it off. Now, as I go through my cities doing things here, you'll see that they're not screaming at me to change their completed buildings, and the reason for that is that this game supports a building queue system. Of course, even Civ 2 kind of did, although you had to edit a text file. But in this one, it's got a nice inbuilt game one where you can build different queues for different types of cities, and then they will work their way through the queue, which is quite handy. You just click the buildings, drag and drop them in whatever order you want, and the game will carry them out, and the cities will carry out those orders if you tell them to auto build. In the end, I didn't bother to use the different queue options, and I was pretty happy with just having one queue for everything, but I could definitely see myself using multiple queues in the future. And if I hop into a city, I can show you how to access it. Basically, at the bottom of the build queue, you'll see a common city option, and that's the name of the build queue. So why don't I load a save game at the end of the science era, where as you can see I've been very busy, and I've got railroads and engineers, and my cities are getting huge, and my empire is now being defended by riflemen. And if I hop into my capital, you'll see it's absolutely huge now, and its districts are filled with many more buildings and wonders. And you'll see it's size 30, which interestingly is the maximum size this game allows. You cannot keep increasing the the city size to crazy sizes like you could in Civ 2 if the land was just right. In this one, your surplus just gets converted to gold. Now, if I turn on cheat mode and have another quick look around the map, you can see the Chinese have been busy and are closing in on my blockade and are none too happy with me now. And over in Africa, oh dear. As you can see, the Egyptians have conquered almost everyone. There's no one left in Europe, and things are looking very bad for the English in South Africa. There's a lot of boats in the ocean too, but the Egyptians' massive armies and gunpowder just means none of the AIs can stop him now. However, he still hasn't really ventured much into the ocean yet, so these guys over in the east are still surviving along in Australia and in New Zealand as well. It's all business as usual here. So now that I've got a bit of an empire going, why don't I show you guys the advisor screens now, which are quite similar to Civ 2 in that you've got the usual start revolution to send things into anarchy and change government. You've got a military report that allows you to look at all your custom unit designs, and it'll tell me how many of them I've built, which as you can see, I've not designed many units. Most of these are the defaults, as I haven't really needed to. I just needed some musketeers and some tall ships to get the job done. And I can also look up other races, and because I've just revealed the map, I now know them all. And next, if I go to city report, it displays all the usual things we'd expect. You can see all my cities, what they're building, whether things are nearly finished, how their growth is going, how much money and science they're producing. And of course I can click on them and it'll take me to the city where I can make my changes. So quite handy for quickly managing the empire. And then we've got the research report screen, which is quite a handy screen, as while it's slightly confusing to read, it'll tell you which civs have what techs, which then helps you in diplomacy with them if you want to do some tech exchanges and you want to know what they've got. And interestingly, in this game, when you exchange a technology, you don't gain it instantly. You simply get the sort of designs that allow you to research it at like half speed or maybe even less. Like you can get it really quickly. So that's an interesting way to stop or delay crazy tech trading going on between different players, as you can't just sit there not doing any research. And this is an interesting screen where you can see custom unit designs used by other factions. So as you can see, there's all sorts of things they've built that I haven't. We've got different variations of musketeers and horsemen and ships. It's pretty cool to see all the different unit designs that are possible for all these similar units. And I can click on them and look at their stats and see icons representing their abilities to give me a good idea of what they're up to. And you can even trade these designs via the diplomacy screen if you don't want to try and mimic it yourself through your own designer, which costs time and resources. And those with a keen eye will notice that the stats for units in this game goes way higher than Civ 2. You can achieve like hundreds of points of attack and defense for some units as you get late in the game. So it's been heavily redesigned. And then of course you've got your standard charts where, as you can see, I'm kicking ass, although the Egyptians are not too far behind me, while the other 13 or whatever civs are all having a pretty rough time of it. And then we've got the wonders of the world, which are displayed in quite a nice way. I like how they sort of branch out from the first one like that, and it'll tell you who has them, and click on them and get information, all the expected interactivity. And the next one is the good old spaceship, which of course at this stage is a bit too soon, so I can't show you that one just yet, but I will later on in another save game. So we'll go to nations, which is essentially the diplomacy and intelligence screen, similar to the foreign advisor in Civ 2. You can look at their stats, and then you can click on the trumpet and talk to them. And this is their no-nonsense diplomacy screen, where you can exchange a map and techs and unit designs, money, and it's a little bit funny to use, but once you get used to it, it's pretty good, as you can either demand or offer something, and you just keep adding and taking things away from either their inventory or your inventory, which then decides what you're proposing towards them, whether it be a demand or an exchange. But generally, other than tech trading, they almost never agreed to any of my proposals, unfortunately. And it actually got annoying as China kept contacting me asking for certain techs, but then refusing what I offered in exchange for what they wanted. And it was like, well, you're the ones who bothered me. If you want it so bad, friggin' accept my offer. As sometimes I was offering better things than what they were asking for, and they still said no, so I thought that was weird. But anyway, last of all is the economy screen, which is pretty similar to Civ 2. It's just slightly rearranged in that it starts as tax, and then you distribute it between research and wealth, and whatever you don't distribute keeps making you money. And wealth is essentially the new happiness. And as you can see, I'm going pretty heavy on research, and as a result, I'm just about to get flight. And the little star up the top there means I'm going to get that next turn. So now I think it's time I showed you guys that unit creator, so why don't I end the turn and we can get flight. And as you can see, when the tech arrives, you can look it up to see what it does, just to remind yourself, and you can look up all the next choices on the pedia as well to help make a decision. But this time, instead of selecting a technology, I'm going to pick military research, which is the custom unit designer, which is definitely one of the coolest features of this game, as it's quite similar to the Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri one. In that game, you're limited by energy, and in this one, you're limited by weight. So you can stack a whole lot of something on there, but then you won't be able to put much else on there. And as you change the unit's attributes, you'll see the little picture changes into a different unit. So if it's slow moving with lots of attack, it becomes a cannon, and then with even more attack, it becomes an early tank. And then I hit the maximum weight, and there's not much more I can do with it, unless I start reducing things again. And as you can see, if I up the defense a bit and lower the attack, it appears to become a soldier unit that's a bit more heavily armed than your standard rifleman. And if I up the mobility, it'll quickly become a cavalry, or in the era I'm entering, cavalry's being phased out, so I'm getting a sort of early tank design. And the game also has this rather interesting overweight ability that almost doubles the unit's stats, making it incredibly powerful, but you can only keep it in that city, and it can't leave the city unless you have railway tracks. And then if I free up some more space, I can then also give it the artillery ability, which allows it to fire over city walls like a howitzer. Then there's of course the old Alpine ability that makes the unit treat all squares like road squares. And then there's a rather interesting fanatic option, which if I recall, I think it makes the unit free, but it only works under certain circumstances. Or maybe it was something, I can't quite remember, but all I remember is its advantages definitely depend on your government and situation. And as the game progresses, you get even more of these special abilities. Like I remember there's a mass production one that makes the unit more expensive, but if you continuously repeat build it, it becomes super cheap. So that's very handy if you've got a city with some special military bases pumping out elite level units. As yes, this game has more levels of veteran status as well. There's also a conscription ability you can get later on that makes units super cheap, but they use up food from your cities like settlers do. And if we look at the ships, things get even more interesting, since as you can see, I've got navigation and steam powers enhancing my ship's speed, and I've got some rather interesting options. You'll see if I up the sea transport ability and reduce its weapons, the unit will turn into a transport. And then I can give it more turbines to make it faster. I can give it a supply ship ability so that any units it's carrying will be healed if they spend some turns on it. And if I turn it back into a warship again, you'll see I can give it the artillery ability similar to land units, which in the case of ships allows it to attack any land units sitting on the coastal regions and bombard cities. Although there's no long range bombardment, if any fans of later Civ games were hoping for that, sorry. If I click on submarine, of course it turns into a submarine. I can give it radar sonar abilities to give it a 2 square sight radius, which is very useful. And of course, now that I've just researched flight, it's opened up the final third area of unit design, which is flying units. And since this is brand new, I haven't got many options yet, but you can see I can basically make it into a fighter. If I give it some fuel, it can last more than one turn in the air, like a bomber. And later in the game, of course, you can give them stealth abilities and all that fun stuff. So yeah, pretty cool, eh? And if I set it to do that, then you'll see up the top there in the research area, it is now working on that. And from the looks of things, I'll have it very quickly next turn too. I can get back to researching regular technologies, which is certainly an interesting way of stopping people going nuts with creating heaps of different unit types, as you've got to sacrifice some research time to get these things made. So you've got to make some tough choices, which is generally why you probably noticed earlier I didn't have a huge amount of unit designs. Now here in the new turn, I've still got some ships exploring the world, and are cool. I can show you guys some combat. Here we go. Get out of my way. Bang! Got another ship moving around Africa. And I should also mention that back home I'm using an army of slaves, which is a special unit granted by the pyramids, which normally by this stage of the game they'd be gone, but because of the Eiffel Tower they now last forever, which is interesting as it's almost a call to power like feature. As you might recall, in that game it had slaves, which were very advantageous in the early era, but then of course certain wonders would put it into slavery, as it should, and but of course your empire would take a massive hit, whereas this one is just a minor minor hit because you can't use the units anymore unless you've got the Eiffel Tower. And as you can see, there are other special units too, which are basically units that you can't design and you can't change. So of course you've got your standard settlers and engineers, your spies, your trading units, and the trading units, by the way, can't make trade routes in this. The only ability they seem to have from Civ 2 is the one where you can use them to help build wonders and other buildings too. And then if I go back to the army of slaves, you can see how they work. Now these poor slaves are currently cleaning up pollution for me, which yes, pollution is in the game as well and behaves pretty similar to Civ 2. Then I think I got rid of them after this, as it felt a bit weird and unsettling having slaves in the modern era. And you'll also notice that I've now revealed more special resources, and a few new ones have popped up here and there. However, the Deadlands are still the same, as I haven't discovered their true purpose yet, but I'll show you what they become quite soon. As here is the modern era. And as you can see, I've got nice skyscrapers in my cities now, and the interface has changed again, although this is probably my least favorite one as it's quite bright. But thankfully there's one more era coming where it goes dark again, and as you can see, my capital is really packed now with a huge amount of buildings and wonders. I'm still hanging on with my riflemen though, as I haven't really been in any danger, but fortunately that is about to change. But before I show you that, you can see here that the Deadlands have now changed, and they have revealed a special final modern era resource. And if I scroll down in there, you can see that they can become either cobalt, uranium, or mercury. And each of these is needed to build the spaceship, which means you have to control all three resources. So kind of similar to Civ 3, you've really got to get around the map to try and get control of them all, otherwise you could miss out on a vital unit and fall behind the other races, whereas in this one you could just simply can't build the spaceship without it, so you're stuck if you want to go for that victory. And even here in massive North America, I could not get all three, but then I found that uranium was over here in Iceland. Now let's turn on cheat mode so I can show you some of that increasing danger I was talking about. The Chinese are still relatively contained. However, now that the Egyptians have killed everyone on their continents, they have now decided, oh hey, that powerful guy on the other side of the ocean, let's get him. So now he is focusing on loading huge armies onto ships and sending them my way. And what's scary is that these corvettes seem to be almost adapted to my strength, in that he's deliberately gone all in defense so my sailing ships cannot destroy his, as his defense strength is 48 and mine is only 32 attack. So if I try to attack him, it's a suicide, which brings up an interesting suicide attack option in this game, where you can either kill him or do massive amounts of damage by suiciding your unit into them. And I did that a couple of times and brought my sailing ships to a fiery end while I built better ones. And as you can see, he's just got ridiculous amounts of musketeers and cavalry. So once these guys started landing in my territory, yes, my riflemen could hold them off, but they just kept suicide attacking. So I very quickly had to update my army and navy, which I'll show you guys in a sec. But as you can see, they've conquered everything, although once again still haven't really done much over in the east. Although interestingly, the Mongols have started landing units sort of around Thailand, which really pissed off the Egyptians and led to some big battles there. But the Vikings are still doing nothing. And then if we go back home, you can see that I've started building cities out on islands in the ocean. And as I mentioned earlier, if you've got the lighthouse wonder, it's like an offshore platform, which then if combined with an offshore platform, your ocean cities can have massive production, like even more than mainland cities. And with a harbour, food is pretty much business as usual with 2 per square. However, if there's a fish nearby or a little bit of land, you can get the city growing pretty quickly too. Now, one final thing I want to show you guys in this modern era before we switch to my final save game in the futuristic era is how they've changed nuclear warfare, in that many people will probably be disappointed to hear that there's no nukes in the game. And instead, the Manhattan Project actually creates an interesting Cold War situation where you can no longer talk to the AIs for 40 turns, and you're basically just in open warfare with them, and you can't exchange texts or anything, like you cannot talk to them. So I'm really not sure how great that really is. I mean, by this stage they kind of all want you dead anyway, but still. That one's a bit of a disappointment. Like on the website, the author pretty much explains his reasoning for it, and that he says basically everyone just gets SDI defense and then they're useless, and that in the real world no one's ever really going to use them, but you know, it's just a fun part of the game that's gone, so it's a bit of a shame really. And now here we go guys, we're into the final era of the game. Semi-modern still, but kind of futuristic, as you can see the skyscrapers are looking a little more funky, and there's a cool space platform next to my capital, nice road railways and farmland everywhere, as my engineers have been very busy. My big capital is pretty much finished building everything it possibly can, and it is now defended by a nice army of mechanical infantries, a tank and a fighter plane, because like I said earlier, I learned my lesson. When the computer started spamming ships and armies onto my land, I had to take drastic action and stop playing so passively in the sole pursuit of technologies. And as you can see, I pretty much have colonized all of North America now, not much left really. I've terraformed a lot of the land, although in this game not everything can be terraformed, in that you can't change prairies, but you can change everything else, which is a bit weird, but better than nothing. And as you can see, to protect my borders and stop all the intruders, I've gone in a true American direction and built a huge navy of battleships patrolling the coast, and I've got an aircraft carrier filled with fighters and bombers, and I've been smashing anything that comes near me, since as you can see, the battleships are very powerful. 620 is way bigger than anything you guys have seen so far, isn't it? And the funny thing is, the units can get much stronger too. And as you can see, I've essentially finished my one square island colonizing policy, as like I said earlier, these cities are devastating. They're just like in Civ 2, they're very hard to take. Despite the AI being smarter in this, he doesn't seem to know what to do with them, as they never got attacked, and they're just production powerhouses, especially the ones next to the big fishery resources. And then over in the east, you can see things have been pretty nuts, and this navy is constantly getting a workout, and I'm constantly having to send them back to port to repair them, which meant I became more dependent on air power to stop them. And as you can see here, we've reached a rather unpleasant and pivotal moment where you can see the AI is finally developing a more modern navy, and once again cleverly adapting to my strategies. He started deploying units with massive defense strengths, like even the freaking transports have a larger defense strength than any of my fighters and bombers can kill. And on top of that, he's given them anti-air as well. So if I demonstrate and attack one, I can at least show you the whole suicide function, where you get this nice interesting screen here that tells you that this unit is going to die, but he might be able to take him out with him. But in this case, the odds are so stacked in their favor that it's more likely I'll just do some damage instead of outright killing him. So there goes that guy. But at least now he should be weak enough for my bomber to take him out. However, obviously this is not a viable strategy, so I'm pretty much at the stage where only my battleships can now stop them, and they take huge amounts of damage doing so. As if I go and look at his cruisers here, you can see they're almost as powerful as my battleships. They're very strong. So I pretty much had to switch my strategy in these final turns to using air for reconnaissance and getting the kills done with the ships. However, what's interesting is that I can actually make my ships way more powerful at this stage with new redesigns, as if I go through the tech list here, you can see most of them are once again pretty similar to how things are set up in Civ 2, with a few new ones here and there. But if I go all the way down to the bottom area where the future technologies are, you'll see that there is no longer a generic future technology, and it's been split into 4 categories, and each of them have multiple levels you can research, and they all give you different benefits and improve things. So artificial intelligence gives you 25 levels of improvements to your naval and air power, and computing technology gives you a whopping 100 levels of advancements to your research capability, which just gives you crazy research abilities. But of course it gets more and more expensive, so it still takes forever to get all this stuff. Material technology gives you 25 levels of benefits to ground and naval again, so you can get your naval stuff really powerful. And then lastly, nanotechnology has 25 levels of bonuses to your production ability, meaning your cities just become insane production powerhouses, which as you can see, if I go look at this predominantly seaside city, 364. That's just insane. So because I went nuts in that technology stream, I can pretty much build anything in one turn now. And so yeah, even though I'd barely scratched the military upgrades, I'd already reached the point where I could build new battleships with like over 1,000 attack strength. But in the end, because I was so close to victory, I decided to hold out with what I already have, which was getting tough, as you can see, the Egyptians are just pumping out tanks and riflemen and about 1 million Davy Crockett's, and they're just pouring them onto these super defense transports and shipping them across the oceans towards me. There's just endless amounts of them across the mainland. And then over in the east, they still haven't quite got to the Spanish yet, but as you can see, they're thinking about it. We've got a transport there. And then down south in Australia, meanwhile, the Mongols have finally started started doing some more stuff, and they've actually gone and killed the Vikings and taken their cities from them. And they've been pestering me a little bit, but not too bad. I've generally been able to take most of them out. And then, of course, the Chinese are still relatively contained and just pumping out lots of riflemen that can barely dent my mechanical infantry now, so they weren't really much of a problem. And then, yeah, back in my empire, you can see I've got some canals now running through Denver and down in Atlanta, and also where my fortress is as well. And this allows me to move ships from one ocean to the other, just like with the real-life Panama Canal. And because I put them through cities and bases, it means the AI can't, because originally I had an exposed one and the AI just started pouring his ships through it, which was highly annoying. Because if you come through me, you gotta pay the toll fee, and the toll fee is death. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. I forgot to mention earlier that there's no barbarians or goody huts, which is a bit of a shame, but I guess it's just another thing that the designer felt was just novelty stuff that messes with balancing and gets in the way of the simulation. So he chopped that stuff out. And really the last thing left to show you is now my colony ship, which, as you can see, he's built some nice custom graphics there, and my ship is nearly finished. And like I said earlier, you need those special resources to build each part. So as you can see, if I go into here in Buffalo, only this city or any other city with the same resource can build the habitation module. No other city I have can. So you can't just have your super powerful capital pouring them all out. It's simply not possible in this. And then if I go over to Denver, only this city or any other city with this type of resource can build the colony ship component. So, you've got to make sure that your cities next to these special resources have good production, because the AI starts getting real angry when you get into the final tech era and start building spaceship parts. And of course, over here in Iceland, we've got my city building the final piece of the puzzle, which is the power modules. So if I turn off cheat mode and end the turn, we can see the latest AI invasion forces closing in. And then here we go. The victory message. We've done it. After ages of poverty and crisis, ages of threats and bleeding military disputes, ages of radical change and incredible progress, we have finally made that old dream of mankind come true. Our ship has been launched for a world far in space to make it a new home for life. And that's it. Like, you can't even continue playing the game after this, which is a little bit of a shame. And there's no score either. So it's more things cut out, as I think the designer felt they were just, once again, extra chaff, vanity things that for him it was all about the simulation. So yeah, that's it. That's the regular game. So pretty much the only thing left to show you is the modded game. Because of the fact that this game is quite similar to Civ 2, and as I mentioned earlier, it uses very similar looking graphical files and has that map editor, people have still used it to create some scenarios or total conversion mod packs. And many of those, in some cases, using Civ 2 mod pack assets, because it was quite easily transferable. And so why don't I show you a few of them now? Firstly, there's the CN Terrains mod pack by Charles, which gives you a choice between a nice enhanced organic terrain that's more colourful than the regular one, a Martian terrain set using assets from Civ 2's Mars scenarios, and a fantasy Underdark terrain set from Mr. Timber's famous Civ 2 Underdark scenario. Although sadly, these are not compatible with the current version, so I had to roll back C-evo to version 1.04, which was one of the last versions before the 2x and 3x terrain size overhaul upgrades came in, and it just used the traditional Civ 2 terrain size. But I'm sure with a bit of work it could be converted over to the modern day version terrain files though. And next is a big one, a full total conversion Star Wars mod pack that is standalone but sadly uses an even older version of C-evo, version 0.130, that is pretty unstable these days. But this mod changes the menu, adds multiple maps, and Star Wars civs, units, buildings, and even some scenarios via the save game system. Sadly, trying to load the map or starting a random sandbox game seems to trigger crashes, but thankfully these scenarios still work. So first we've got a Battle of Hoth scenario, which appeals to me since of course my first ever Civ 2 scenario was a Battle of Hoth scenario that I'll be covering in my Civ 2 episode of this series. But anyway, as you can see, we're in a spectator mode and can look around the map and place units. Like, why don't we put a AT-AT here? And then if we end the turn, we can take control of the Galactic Empire. And then you can see that the author has used C-evo's changing GUI system to allow for custom GUIs for each civ, which is really cool. And if I go into the Empire's home city, you can see custom citizens, buildings, and wonders like the Death Star and an iron cannon. And if we go to the city's production, you can see that there are many, many more Star Wars themed buildings and units and wonders, and you can look them up in the manual to see bigger pictures and get more info, allowing you to really just see how much the author has added in. The old manual is a bit different to the current day one, but down here is all the reference this week. We can see all the buildings and stuff. Like, you can see the author has used some really nice pictures for these buildings. And there's of course the Civ 3 like mini wonders here too, all changed to be Star Wars like. And here's lots of lovely Star Wars wonders too. And it looks like the Death Star has replaced the Manhattan Project as it stops all diplomacy. And if I end the turn again, we should now switch to the Rebels, who get their own GUI style too. And we can attack with this X-Wing, although sadly there's no sound effects with this mod. And another issue is that the quit button seems to grey out sometimes, so I've got to force close the game and reload. Now the other scenario is based on the Battle of Naboo, with the Gungan army versus the Trade Federation droid army, which you can see is being played out over a big fertile forest and grassland area, with the Gungan city and the lake nearby the main Naboo city. Unit graphics is pretty good, although I think it suffers a bit from downsizing issues, as I sort of struggle to tell what each thing is. And there's something familiar about these models too. I wonder if they've been taken from that 20-year-old Star Wars game that used the Age of Empires 2 engine. But anyway, if I end the turn, we get control of the Gungans first. I can charge some dudes across, but it doesn't look like they've got enough moves to strike on the first turn. But if I end it again, it looks like the Naboo people are a separate faction to the Gungans. And if I click on their home city, we can see they get a nice custom honeycomb-like GUI interface too. And I guess because we're allied, I can view the Gungan city. They of course have got their own GUI as well. And if I end the turn once more, we can take control of the Trade Federation. If I look in their city, it looks like they've got a nice sort of lava-like looking interface. So yeah, it's a pretty cool mod, but with you in control, that means there's no AI, which makes this not very single-player friendly. So it's a bit of a shame that the other sandbox modes don't seem to work anymore, as I can see from the graphics files that come with the mod that the author has made other nice Clone Wars and Galactic War factions with the Rebels and Smugglers and Clone Armies that we sadly don't get to see in these existing two scenarios. But once again, this mod could probably be converted to a newer version, but I suspect it'd be quite a bit of work. Now there are more mods out there that I'd love to try out and also show you guys, such as the Lord of the Rings mod and the Mythos mod and the X-World sci-fi mods, but sadly these ones were not hosted on the C-evo site and were hosted off-site and have been lost over the decades. So if you have them, please contact me and I can arrange permanent public hosting for them to ensure they're preserved forever, just like I've been doing with the Civ 2 and Civ 3 mods I've been rescuing in my preservation project for them. In the case of Lord of the Rings, the add-on pack download is actually still working and accessible, allowing me to see some of the cool graphics and custom factions that mod adds, but sadly the original mod is not available and missing. I've contacted the author and he doesn't have it anymore either, and only an incomplete record of its old website with no working downloads exists on Internet Archive. So that's a real shame, as I suspect much like the Star Wars mod, it was a big fun total conversion mod that would have been cool to see. Well, I think that's everything. So to finish up, I'll say that I had an absolute blast playing this game. It really did feel like a fun alternative take on Civ 2's formula, and in some ways actually felt more like Civ 2 than even Free Civ does. However, Free Civ still probably takes the cake though, due to its impressive size and features and flexibility, and I look forward to doing a big video tour of that in the future too. And if you haven't already seen it, make sure you check out my big Civilization 2 in HD with mods and scenarios main episode tour video, that this video is actually a bonus to. These videos are part of a huge series I'm doing on playing classic Sid Meier Civilization series games in HD, and spin-offs like Colonization, Master of Magic, Test of Time, Call to Power, and Alpha Centauri. I'm also looking at fan games like Free Civ and Free Col, plus I'm trying to play and win as the normally unplayable Barbarian faction in all of these games. And I'm looking at some of the best fan total conversion mods out there, including some of my own I've been working on too. So make sure you check out the playlist link in the description below and subscribe to my channel to get notifications when I release new episodes. But yeah, I think that's it for this video, so I'll see you next time, guys. Bye!
You